At this time, I will reconvene into open session this meeting of the Arlington Independent School District Board of Trustees for June 29th, 2023 at 6:42. Members of the public may access the meeting via AISD website at www.aisd.net. One or more of trustees may participate in the meeting via video conference call. A quorum of the Board of Trustees will be physically present at the administration building. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Our board meetings are open to the public and we welcome everyone and thank you for participating in public education. While our meetings are open to the public, this is a meeting and we do have business to conduct. Disruptions will not be permitted. Anyone who disrupts the meeting or speaks when others are talking may be asked to leave or be escorted out by the security attending the meeting. We welcome civic input, but we insist that we remain respectful and civil. Thank you for your cooperation. We will start our meeting with the opening ceremony. Please join Mr. Wilbanks in leading us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee. Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
You may be seated. Please silence all cell phones and electronic devices to avoid disruptions to those around you. And now, if you would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. The first item on our agenda is a presentation. And the presentation A is Citizens Bond Oversight Committee Report to the Board. Dr. Wirtz?
Thank you, President Fowler. Tonight, as is their charge, we have a report from the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, and I want to first extend our gratitude to you for your service. As you know, they help us in our decision-making when it comes to the implementation of our 2019 bond, and I'd like to invite Mr. Horn to the podium. He's going to get us started.
President Fowler, members of the board, Dr. Wirtz, thank you. This is always one of the most fun times for me at the end of the year to have the opportunity to introduce our CBOC. And I'm not going to introduce the members tonight. I'm going to let Mr. Finicum do that. But I will ask Mr. Finicum, Charles Finicum, to come to the podium. He's going to deliver their annual report for you. So,
Charles, thanks, Jenny. I appreciate it. Madam President, Trustees, Dr. Wirtz, my name is Charles Finicum, and I am the chairman of the 2019 Bond Oversight Committee, and I'm happy to give our second annual Bond Oversight Committee report. Let's see if I can work this. Our agenda tonight is to go over our purpose, our composition, our meeting schedule, our 12 charges, the expected outcome of the bond, and of course to give some special thanks. So our purpose is we were established to provide transparency and to enhance public confidence in the use of proceeds from the sale of the bonds that were authorized by the voters on November the 5th of 2019. The purpose of our committee is to provide findings and recommendations to you, the board, relating to the expenditure of the bond proceeds authorized in that 2019 bond election, the progress of the 2019 bond program, and ways the district can maximize the potential of the 2019 bond program. So our composition is made up of 11 core members, 1 alternate, and 8 slab students. We do have 2 vacancies, so we've been running a little thin. So we're actually 3 short. And I understand that you all will be hopefully voting to fill those vacancies. So I would like to take time to introduce, I have 4 of the members here. Kimberly Lloyd, she's here, she is our scribe. Adam Baker, Poppy Moore, and Kimberlyn Proctor. I'm super happy to have committee here today. And we, of course, had 8 SLAB students, Student Leadership Advisory Board students. They have fulfilled their junior year, gone on to be seniors in high school. It's summertime, and they said, no, we're not showing up. So our meeting schedule is we have a orientation meeting virtually the 1st of August. We have 4 quarterly meetings. The first one this year was at the CVPA and athletic facility. We met again at Webb Elementary School, toured the new facility as they were finalizing construction before they moved in. We met at Seguin High School and toured the MAC. And then our last meeting, we got to actually tour Berry Elementary, which was phenomenal. It's really just great when you see Webb and Berry and now the new Thornton coming on board. And then we had our meeting at Crow. And then, of course, our last meeting for this year is here to give you our report. So we have 12 charges. The first thing we do at each of our first meeting, is to review the charges, or is to review the 2019 report submitted by the Capital Needs Steering Committee, so that we are making sure that we're focusing on the tasks that we need to be focusing on. Our observation has been AISD staff conveyed bond scope with full transparency and identified projects that are consistent with the district's long-range master plan. I do want to say, and take the time to do this, and I'm going to talk about the directors that showed up. Each and every director, each and every person, the CFO, Carla Walker, Assistant Superintendent of Finance, Kelly, I call Kelly Mr. Spreadsheet, because if you ever dealt with Kelly, you know that he has a spreadsheet for everything. Everybody was, each and every one of them, Director Collins in Transportation, Dr. Anderson in Fine Arts, whenever they were asked a question, they were fully open, transparent, and gave us all the information that we asked for. So I just want people to know the transparency is there. And our recommendation is that we sustain the AISD staff methodology for orientation of future CBOC members, with a caveat. The SLAB students expressed a desire to us about the second meeting. They're kind of coming in. They're appointed to the Student Leadership Advisory Board. They show up at our meetings. They see people they don't know. They see 2 or 3 school board trustees there. And they're having a hard time kind of catching up. So I know it will be difficult. I don't know how problematic it would be. But when those 8 SLAB students are assigned to the committee, if we could do an orientation for them to onboard them so that they kind of are up to speed on what we're doing. The kids are super helpful. They contribute, but it might just make it a little easier on them and give them a little more comfort level. So our second charge is to review the process used to solicit, qualify, and select design professionals, contractors, and vendors for projects funded by the bond program. The observation has been that the bidding processes such as CMAR, which is Construction Manager at Risk, and the competitive sealed proposal, CSP methods, were fully explained. Last year we talked about CMAR and the bidding process and all the state statutes in the 2.5-hour meeting that we had, where we kind of glazed over because it was information overload, but yes, it was fully explained. Architect, consultant, and contractor performance evaluated to determine the selection for additional work. The method of procurement recommendations for bond projects based on the best value to the district. Our recommendations are that you continue to maximize best value through competitive bid process, continue to include the RFQ process information on the district website, and we'd like to see continued process of posting the results of the RFQs on the district website for transparency's sake. Our third charge is to review reports on the current status and planned implementation of the bond program to determine whether such status and implementation are consistent with the bond program that was approved by the voters. Our observation is, again, talking about the directors that showed at the meetings, efforts by facility construction, fine arts, transportation, Director Stevens in safety security, technology meet the intent of the 2019 bond program as approved by the voters. And we do understand, because we are citizens and we live this every day, inflation and rising costs of construction and manufactured process is creating significant funding challenges to the district to meet the original expectations and the intent of the bond program, and we understand that. Our recommendation is for the district to continue to analyze and prioritize the most critical program needs of the district for completion, and continue to review the bond scope on projects and realign from a cost standpoint to meet the bond intent and manage for inflation. I want everybody to look at this picture because this is by far the most popular. I don't care if it's a brand new campus, whatever. All 72 elementary schools got two new playground facilities with sunshade canopies and friendship benches, and every elementary school teacher I've talked to, every elementary school administrator I've talked to, this is the single largest, biggest hit from the bond program. So charge number 4 is to review the bond program for reports that track budgets, encumbrances, expenditures, and estimated costs for completion of each bond project to understand the overall financial position of the bond program. Our observation recognizes the need to realign the 2019 bond program to ensure completion of projects and manage costs against rising inflation. The district has capitalized and did a wonderful job early on during COVID when they started letting things by buying the playground equipment and then having the vendor store it and give it to us as an on-need basis at no extra cost to us. Was a phenomenal way to save money. So the district has capitalized on labor and competitive pricing on early projects. Our recommendation is to sustain the district efforts to monitor, track, and report those costs. Charge number 5 is, I really think is great. So, did we go down? I thought we were at 32. Oh. Hub utilization, and for people who don't know what HUB, it stands for Historically Underutilized Business. We review the HUB utilization on facilities projects. When we looked at what 2014 bond before us, they were at like 15, 16, 17. We ended last year, because the way the projects fell, in the 30s. Currently right now, as of this month, we're at 26.42. AISD considers past vendor hub performance when awarding new projects. And facilities and their department is really, really good in participating in the DFW area minority contractor symposiums and hosting minority contractor events twice annually here at this board to improve hub utilization opportunities. So, you know, it's on the hub side, it's kind of hard once you get to be a hub and you grow, then you can't be a hub anymore because you're too big. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot where you can have that and get those people in and take advantage of the historically underutilized businesses. Our recommendations are to sustain the efforts to require increased hub participation and sustain those efforts to promote hub participation through our marketing events. Charge number 6, let's talk about audits. They're fun. So we review internal and external audits of the bond program to assess the administration's response to the audit and remediation efforts of the district as applicable. Our observations are that the external audit scope identified and overseen by the district's chief, overseen by the chief internal auditor. Internal controls help identify those projects requiring third-party audits. External audits also will continue under the direction of our chief internal auditor. And all CMAR, construction manager at risk, and random CSP projects are externally audited. So that just helps with transparency. Our recommendation is to sustain those efforts to conduct random external audits where appropriate. The CBOC will review project audit findings during 2023 and 2024. We want to add audit information to our quarterly meetings, and the committee asked for, and hopefully we will get, an actual audit presentation, have the auditors come and talk to us. They really would like to know how the inner workings of that works. So they asked for it, we're going to do it. It'll be fun. Hopefully Director Lewis won't serve us pasta that night, so we'll have a heavy stomach. Okay, charge number 7, review and provide input on AISD's communications to the public regarding the 2019 bond program. The district communications efforts are effective and provide great detail. Ryan Pierce is at our meetings. Our communications director, Anita Foster, is phenomenal. Our recommendations are to sustain website presence and informational transparency, continue to leverage the social media platforms for external communications. Think about adding a what's up next in the bond so that people can see what is coming forward. Include a what's going on in the bond segment to the district media postings. We can have our committee people. I do not want to do on-camera interviews, but we can have our committee people. They're beautiful folks and they can do it. We'd love to have them talk about that. And one of the things we'd like to see happen is involve the students to assist with social media presence. So when we talked about social media, the Student Leadership Advisory Board kids are super helpful, and they communicate, and they've got some phenomenal ideas. In our meeting when we were talking about this, the SLAB student from Lamar, we were talking about websites and exposure. And he, I think, pulled up one of the social media platforms, I think it was Twitter, and said, look, the district has 6,000 members, which I'm not a Twitter guy, so I'm like, great. He pulled up Arlington Urban, they have 60,000 members. He goes, why can't we be here? Which is a phenomenal idea. So that's where that came from, and we hope that we consider, and the kids, and consider adding the kids because they have fresh, good ideas. So charge number 8 and charge number 9 kind of are very similar, but I'll read them separately. With the coordination of the superintendent or his designee, assess the degree of satisfaction of the key stakeholders with the quality of work and impact on bond program projects. This year we conducted on-site visits of the CVPA, Center for Visual and Performing Arts, and the next door AISD Athletic Center. We toured the brand new Webb campus. We went to Seguin. We toured the new Berry, and again went back to Crow Leadership Academy. We tried to get into the Dan Dipert. We tried to get into the Dan Dipert twice, but they're too busy, too booked. So hopefully we can get a meeting scheduled for this year. CBOC members received positive feedback from all the AISD faculty and staff at each of the sites visited. Our recommendation is to include virtual tours of ongoing and completed bond projects, which is something we talked about last year. We had some issues where that couldn't happen this year. So I think we're back on track, and Ryan Pierce in Communications is trying to make that happen. And then again, continue to increase the bond presence on social media. And like I said, charge number 9 is similar. With the coordination of the superintendent or the designee, conduct on-site campus and facility visits related to the bond projects as necessary. Our observation is, again, we received positive feedback from the faculty and staff at each of the sites we visited. Contractor management responsive to the principal requests and requirements was phenomenal. At most of them, we had the contractors there, the architects, the contractor builders there, and so they were able to answer questions and show us, an inside of it, which was great. Our recommendation is to continue to visit the campus locations as they come online. Charge number 10 is what we do at our last meeting as a group before we come here, and that's where we agree by majority vote upon all findings and recommendations to present it to the board. Now, this year you all couldn't be with us. You all were doing a superintendent search. So, but the year before, I think 3 of you were with us. What I try to do is open this up and kind of I kind of try to facilitate. I make it an open forum with all we ask the question to every one of the committee members, let them give their input. We talk about it, we decide. That's where we're getting the most input from the SLAB students, is in that open forum. So everything that we talked about today basically came out of that meeting. So our observation is the committee agreed by majority vote with the enclosed recommendations. When our CBOC members aren't present, we do try to have attendance virtually. And again, significant participation by the Student Leadership Advisory Board members, super informative and helpful to understand the impact of the bond on the students, which is great. Our recommendation is to continue to encourage attendance by our SLAB students and our 3 board members who are on our committee. Charge number 11 is what we do tonight, and that's report to the board annually or more frequently if necessary on the implementation of the bond program. Our observation is the annual briefing is just fine. Once a year is fine. Our recommendation is we continue the annual reporting, and we want to sustain the board member presence at the CBOC meetings to facilitate informal updates and communication. Number 12 is to coordinate with the superintendent or his designee to maintain a presence on the AISD website with a link on the AISD homepage for the 2019 bond. Our observation is the website presence and dashboards continue to improve. Bond progress materials and reports are made easily accessible. We see that they continue to leverage the audio-visual information efforts. Our recommendations are to sustain those efforts to develop the website presence, to leverage social media and marketing efforts to enhance the push to viewer opportunities. And that, my friends, is the end of our charge. So let's talk about 2019 bond program expected outcomes, the expanded programming, educational adequacy, efficient utilization of facilities, facility condition improvements, and safety and security improvements. As for expanding program through the bond, the district now has full-day pre-K offered at all neighborhood elementary schools, full-day pre-K for 4-year-old students, half-day pre-K for 3-year-olds, STEM learning incorporated. We have 2 campuses for fine arts dual language at the secondary level at Gunn Junior High, and we'll have the new Arlington High School Fine Arts Academy, which is under construction. And in my opinion, I think it's the largest high school in Arlington on any given day is the Career Technical Center. It's phenomenal, and the expansion of the CTC and the technical programming. Educational adequacy, accessible elementary school playgrounds, which again has been a major hit. 2 new replacement playgrounds at each elementary school that are ADA accessible. They have solar canopies shading the equipment areas, and the kindness benches, which is a wonderful thing to have. There's 4 at each campus playground area. Fine arts facility updates. We have 2 fine arts and dual language academies at the secondary level, or will have. Fine arts improvements at each of the secondary schools. Platform, stage, and sound lighting improvement at the junior highs and elementary level. The athletic facility updates, girls competitive softball fields at each of the comprehensive high schools. Additions and renovations at each of the 3 varsity stadiums, one to be built. Life cycle replacements on artificial turf and track surfaces at each comprehensive high school. Restroom, concession stand, storage buildings at each junior high. I happen to live in central Arlington near Bailey and can see all the construction there. I try to stay off Bowen anyway, but now that's another reason. Efficient utilization of facilities. Consolidation and replacement of the older facilities, increased efficiency and utilization, decreased operational costs with personnel, utilities, transportation, updated state-of-the-art educational facilities, replacement of elementary schools and junior high, so Berry, Thornton, and Webb replaced. Carter Junior High will be replaced, it's coming online. Replacement at the Security Transportation Center with improved operational efficiency, updated security systems technology, improved training, and they get bathrooms. Yay, wonderful bathroom facilities. So the reduced number of the T buildings. So as we stand right now, since the bond started, the bond has reduced the fleet of temporary buildings and AISD by 56%. That deserves a round of applause. We are down to 77 temporary buildings remaining in the district inventory, and that in itself is a phenomenal thing. Facility condition improvements, again, life cycle and condition deficiency improvements at all campuses except for the newly constructed campuses between 14 and that are in the 19 bond program. Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing upgrades, flooring, ceiling, and lighting upgrades, roof replacements, ADA improvements, restroom, gymnasium improvements, and paving and landscaping upgrades. And then we get to safety and security, the continuation of upgrading security access on all campuses, additional keyless entry points, additional iPad-based cameras with higher resolution, upgrading the district fleet with GPS tracking systems, adding additional interior and exterior cameras on buses, enhanced communication for stakeholders through the new district fiber-wide network and upgraded PA systems, and upgrading burglar and fire alarm systems. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our report, and that brings you up to date on what we've done this year. We, of course, would like to extend special thanks to you, President Fowler, the board members. So happy to see my former PTA council president on the board. Congratulations. Brooklyn, congratulations on yours. We're PTA council together also. Justin Chapa, our board VP. Sarah McMurrow, our board secretary. Dr. Rice, board member. Brooklyn board member. David Wilbanks, board member. And Leanne Haynes, board member. And thank you again to our administrative staff. Dr. Wirtz, thank you so much for stepping in and doing what you're doing. Our chief financial officer, Darla Moss, who is at our meetings, who handles and gives us wonderful financial information. Dr. Hill, Mr. Horn, Mr. Spreadsheet. Carla Martin, our assistant superintendent of facility services, financial services. Eric Upchurch, Corey Robinson, Coach White, Mike Parkos, Dr. Anderson, Director Lewis at Food Service, Director Stevens in Security, and congratulations, Director Collins, on your retirement. I have a feeling on August the 16th, he is not going to be waking up at 3 a.m. So that's what I have. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my report. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Do I have any trustees with questions or comments? Ms. McMurrow?
Thank you, Mr. Finicum. Mine is more so just instead of a question, I just wanted to thank you and thank all of the CBOC members. We're doing some switching of committees right now and onboarding our new trustees, but the past year I've been really blessed to be the chair of the Community Engagement Committee that we have as a board, and you've been a wonderful chair. I'm so
Thank you.
excited
Thank you.
that you're continuing to lead these charges for our CBOC. And, you know, I'm excited also that tonight, one of our agenda items is we're going to vote on many returning and also some new CBOC members. And, you know, we have the list, but what that list won't tell you is that we have such a great, dynamic, and diverse CBOC committee. And it's comprised of Arlington ISD alumni, many of you all, AISD parents, grandparents, longtime and new community partners. And you guys don't hold back with the questions and the
No,
ideas
we
that you
don't.
have. And that includes our SLAB students. They always had such great insight, and they see, I mean, they're the ones that this is all for, the students. So it's been, I agree with you that it has been so critical to have their voice at each of our meetings, and they have been just as involved. I agree with you there. But I just wanted to reiterate my gratitude. I'm so grateful that you all have been involved at this level. It's remarkable, and what you do absolutely makes a difference for our school district. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McMurrow. Mr. Wilbanks?
Thank you, President Fowler, and thank you again, Charles, for chairing this committee. And you had a lot of great recommendations sprinkled throughout your charge. Number one, I think it was a great idea to give SLAB students their own orientation to help them get up to speed, because I remember coming on new to that committee way back when. I'm not going to tell you how long ago, and took me a while to get my sea legs. I can't imagine what it's like for those students. So I think that's something we really should, as a board, consider and work with and help onboard those students, because as Ms. McMurrow said, their feedback is invaluable.
Amazing.
So, and I don't want to put our internal auditor on the spot, but I agree with you on charge number 6. Those audits of those contracts have more than paid for themselves. Tim, would you be too shy to come and share just how much money we've saved due to those audits, or give a ballpark?
Is he the one that's going to come to our meeting? Good. You'll be coming to our meeting, so welcome.
I'm glad you didn't want to put me on the spot. Yeah, and honestly, it is going to be a real ballpark figure, okay? But our total costs on audits, including 2014 and 2019 bond programs, our total costs have been in the neighborhood of less than about $500,000. Our total recoveries and savings on all of those projects have been in the neighborhood of probably about $3 million.
So more than
So
pay
our
for
return on
themselves.
investment, obviously, and so that's why we're continuing that, the external audits.
So I'm right there with you, Charles. We got to
We
continue
look forward to
that.
having him at our meeting in the fall.
So,
Thank you. Thank you.
and speaking of our students, going back to the SLAB, your recommendation on charge number 7 about getting the students involved with our social media presence, I know there's more than one board member that would agree with you. That's a great idea. And then finally, on the last charge on keeping presence on our website, are your team members pretty satisfied with the depth and the amount of materials that are maintained
So
up
far,
there?
we've seen improvement over last year, and that was improvement from the year before. There are things we'd like to see made a little easier. Sometimes it's a little hard to navigate through. I mean, 2019 bond page has its own page. It is kind of difficult to maneuver, in my opinion. It's not super user-friendly, but I'm not a real computer technical guy, so I would like to just go and find. All the information is there. if you know where to find it. So I think if there was a little ease in maneuvering would be good. Is that?
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. I remember back in the olden days, there was, when Kelly first came on board, there was a plethora of information available, his Gantt charts. So if you're a citizen or a trustee trying to answer a constituent's question, you could easily go there and find the information. I don't know that that's the case today. So that's something for you guys to work
I don't know if it's because there's
with.
so much information out there that there's no way, I guess there's a way to compartmentalize it, or that's why we suggest like what's new in the bond,
Yep.
what's coming forward in the bond, so that you can kind of categorize those things, take it out of the main page and put it like, this is what's going to happen next, this is what's happened, here's the information that you can find.
Yeah, no. Again, thank you for all the work that you guys have done on the committee. I was once in your shoes, so I know exactly. Sometimes it feels like you're drinking from a fire hose in those meetings, but it's all good stuff. So, and again, thank you for your report.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Dr. Reich?
Thank you, President Fowler. Thank you, Mr. Finicum, for chairing the committee, for giving the report. To the committee members that are here, thank you, and those that are not here, as has been previously stated, the time and the information that you have to digest is quite a lot and is very consuming. So as a board-appointed committee, we really appreciate the time and the attention and the feedback that we are receiving from you. And definitely very good recommendations throughout this, definitely things that we can continue to discuss and considering implementing. And I know it hasn't been easy for the district staff. Mr. Horn and your department, you guys have done a great job in managing an ever fluid situation as far as the supply chain, economy, et cetera. That added a level of complexity for the committee, I know, to have to navigate through these waters versus a times are good bond implementation type of thing. And I know that we're not out of those woods yet, that there's still a lot more. So for your continued service, thank you, because it's not necessarily going to be a smooth ride from here on out. I wanted to ask just one question. It might be for you, might be for Mr. Horn. As I think you know, I'm very much have always been an advocate and kind of an instigator on what we can do for Hub and opportunities there from many, many moons ago. And so it's encouraging to see where our numbers are. I was just curious, do we do any type of surveying of the current Hub, any Hub participants, as far as the process, the opportunities, what they felt in being a recipient, if it worked well, or that we could tweak and maybe get more opportunities out there, access to those opportunities?
No, actually, we don't do that, but that's a good idea, and we can look into that
Yeah.
and try to implement something of that nature. I think, because most of those they're second tier subcontractors, and so it'd be pretty easy for us to try to find a way to reach out to them and do that. So I'll look into that, and we'll get some more information for you.
Okay, well, and really, it's not just for me, it's just for our overall
Sure.
program and process. I always say when I'm communicating with the public, all the input I can receive best informs my decisions up here on the dais, and I think that would just best inform our decisions on the dais as well as for you moving forward to try to increase that number so that at the end of this bond program, we're going, wow, how did we get here this high?
Absolutely.
Versus, man, I wish we could have gotten just a few more percentage of that.
Certainly.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Ms. Richardson?
Mr. Finicum, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for all the committee members who served with you. The one detail that really stuck out to me was the drop of temporary buildings that we have
Isn't that
had.
wonderful?
I just want to commend you because I spent my 6th and 7th grade years in a temporary building. And I can remember when it was cold, it was freezing, and when it was hot, it was miserable, and it didn't just affect the kids, it seemed to affect the teachers and the morale. And I just want to commend you for, thank you for getting kids in classrooms, getting teachers in classrooms where they have the room to do what they can do with the capabilities they have. So thank you in the Bond Oversight Committee. I am so looking forward to serving with you next year.
We're looking forward to it also.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson, and I spent my first 3 years of teaching in a portable building, and you're right, when it was cold, and hot, it was hot. And if our little portable air conditioners were working, they were very loud, and you couldn't even hear the bell systems. You had to constantly look at your watch or the clock to dismiss your students and expect the other students in. So it's wonderful that we're able to move them into the building. And I want to thank you, Mr. Finicum, for doing such an incredible job as chair. You and your committee really are the eyes and ears for the district and the community to make sure that we're spending the money as we promised the community we would on the bond, that projects are getting done and they're getting done the right way. So we appreciate all of that work. And I love that you get to go in and see the bond in action, to go in the buildings and see what's being done. But we appreciate your work because you are a very hard-working committee. And we know that, but you're our eyes and our ears to make sure that those dollars are being spent where we said they were going to be spent. So we appreciate it so much.
You're
And
so
again,
welcome.
thank you for agreeing to be the chair again.
My pleasure.
We love your leadership, and
Thank
I
you.
want to thank Ms. McMurrough for being the chair of the committee for the past couple of years. And I know she has loved that and done a phenomenal job as the leader of the committee. And I want to thank Mr. Chapa and Ms. Richardson and Ms. Haynes for agreeing to be the next committee on the bond oversight. So I think it's going to be a great
Welcome.
year. But thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Ms.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we come to our open forum for agenda items. As stated on the posted agenda, members of the public who desire to address the board regarding an item on the agenda are required to register at www.aisd.net board meeting speaker request no later than 3 p.m. the day of the board meeting. Ms. Forsberg, do we have any requesters registered to address the board regarding agenda items?
No, ma'am, we have no registered speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Forsberg. Next, we will consider administrative ratifications and appointments. Dr. Wertz?
Thank you, President Fowler. I'd like to recommend the board ratify the appointments of the individuals discussed in closed session for Principal of Workman Junior High, Assistant Principal for Arlington High School, and Assistant Principal of Spear Elementary.
Dr. Reich?
No. Move to approve.
You scared me there for a minute, Dr. Reich. We have a second. We have a motion by Dr. Reich. Do I have a second? Second. We have a second by Ms. McMurrough. Please vote. Ooh, that was close. All vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to invite you to stand as I recognize you to introduce you, and we'll start off with the new principal of Workman Junior High, and this is Dr. Aaron Fogelman. Just a little bit about Dr. Fogelman. She started her career as a 7th and 8th grade English teacher at Gunn Junior High, so she's one of us. She moved to an AVIC coordinator at Lamar High School, assistant principal at Lamar High School, and is most recently a dean of instruction at Lamar High School. She has her Bachelor's of Arts degree in English Literature from West Virginia University, master's in teaching at UTA, and she earned her PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies also at UTA, so congratulations. I'd like to introduce our new assistant principal at Arlington High School, Natasha Newsom. Natasha comes to us from Fort Worth ISD. She was a 9th through 12th grade BCIS teacher and coach. She also was a business teacher at Saginaw High School in Eagle Mountain, Saginaw. In Arlington ISD, she also taught at Arlington High School and was a coach there, business teacher. And then at Everman High School, she spent some time there also as a business teacher and head coach. And her most recent position is an associate assistant principal at Midlothian High School. She earned her bachelor's degree at UTA in information systems and went to Lamar University for her Master of Education and Administration. Welcome, Ms. Newsom. And then last but not least, the new assistant principal for Spear Elementary is Eric Aguirre. Eric comes to us from Dallas ISD, where he served as a science teacher at Spence Middle School and a chemistry teacher at Seagoville High School. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Multidisciplinary Studies at UTEP, University of Texas El Paso, and then he went to UTA, University of Texas Arlington, for his Master of Education in Curriculum and Instruction. So congratulations and welcome to Arlington ISD.
Thank you all so much for agreeing to step into your new roles. We know that you're going to do a fantastic job. You were chosen for these positions, and just thank you for stepping up and agreeing to work in AISD and continue your good work if you've already been here. And just thank you. And we have a backdrop out in the hallway if you'd like to gather with your friends and coworkers and get some pictures. But thank you so very much. Let's move on. Next on our agenda are action items, and we do have 3. Dr. Wirtz.
So action item A is for the board to consider appointments for individuals to the Financial Futures Committee and the appointment of a committee chairperson. The Community Engagement Committee for the board has been actively reviewing this, and I bring it to you for your consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Wirtz. Do we have any trustees with questions or discussion? Seeing none, do I have a motion? Ms. Haynes?
I move to approve appointments to the Financial Futures Committee, the appointment of the committee chairperson, Ms. April Pettit, and committee vice chair, Mr. Blake Davidson, as proposed, and to authorize the Board Community Engagement Committee to fill future vacant positions as needed.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. We have a motion for Ms. Haynes. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second for Mr. Chapa. Please vote. Motion carries in the affirmative. We next move to action item B, consider appointment of individuals to the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee and appointment of the committee chairperson. Dr. Wirtz?
So as you mentioned, action item B is for the board to consider appointments for individuals to the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee and the appointment of a committee chairperson. And as with the previous motion, the Community Engagement Committee has been actively reviewing this, and again, I bring it to you all for consideration.
Mr. Wilbanks?
If there's no discussion, I move to approve the appointments to the Citizen Bond Oversight Committee, the appointment of the committee chairperson, Mr. Charles Finicum, as proposed, and to authorize the Board Community Engagement Committee to fill future vacant positions as needed.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. We have a motion from Mr. Wilbanks. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Ms. McMurrough. Please vote. Motion carries. Thank you. We now move to action item C, and that's consider all matters relating to the issuance of the bond. And Ms. Darla Moss?
Thank you, President Fowler, trustees, Dr. Wirtz. Tonight, we're asking the board to approve an order authorizing the issuance of and sale of unlimited tax school building and refunding bonds for the Series 2023. This is going to be Phase 4 of the $966 million bond package approved by the voters in 2019. Our bond counsel, Mr. Sam Gill, is here, and he would be happy to answer any questions. And we also have Eric Maha of Hilltop Securities, our financial advisor. He's going to do a brief presentation, and he will be glad to answer any questions that you might have as well.
Good evening, President Fowler, trustees, Dr. Wirtz. Thank you, Ms. Moss. Tonight's agenda item, as Ms. Moss mentioned, is a parameter order for the next phase of funding on the bond program. And we put together a few slides here this evening. Some of them are familiar, if you recall back at the June meeting, just a high-level summary of the planned issuance in terms of timing and the numbers, if you will. So on the first page, I believe you have a paper copy, and also on the screen there, page 2. This bond issue is sized to fund $100 million in project proceeds to the district as part of the $966 million. This would leave $163 million after this bond sale remaining for the district to access from the 2019 program. In conjunction with the $100 million, we've identified back in 2020 the district issued bonds to refinance some older bonds, and given the market dynamics at the current time, there's a potential opportunity to save interest costs by refinancing that portion of the 2020 bonds. In total, we'd have the $100 million in new money, and then the refunding component is around $47 million. So we could package those into one bond issue. $100 million would go to fund projects. The $47 million would refinance some of the older bonds for savings. So within the order before the board this evening, Mr. Gill has drafted their certain parameters. You'll notice section 3 of that order identifies and lays out those parameters. On the new money component, the $100 million, I can list some of the parameters. The not to exceed amount for this bond issue is proposed at the $100 million, so that would produce $100 million to the district. The not to exceed interest rate is a 5.75%. Current market, we're quite a bit less than that, so we've been conservative in that interest rate. That ties back to some of our earlier models in terms of maximum interest rate. Current market, like I said, much less. Maximum term on the $100 million, we're proposing 2048, which is a 25-year repayment consistent with the district's existing bonds in the program. On the refinance side, the refunding side, not to exceed amount $46.915 million. State law governs that. We cannot issue more bonds than we're paying off, so that's governed by state law. We would propose a 1.5% savings threshold. So if we're unable to achieve at least 1.5% in savings, then we would not go forward with the refunding component. So 2030 is the maximum term on the refunding. We would not extend the debt. We would keep the current repayment term on those existing bonds. And if we have the opportunity to save on interest costs, we'll take that opportunity. If not, we'll just focus on the $100 million. So. And then back in June, you may recall, there's been 5 firms identified to underwrite the bond issue. Siebert, Williams, and Schenck would be the senior underwriter, and then you see here on page 3 the 4 co-managers in this situation. And then lastly, on page 4, we have a calendar of events. With board approval, the next steps, we would go through the bond rating process, and then ultimately leading up to being in a position to price the bonds. We're currently targeting the week of July 18th, 19th. I think we're focusing on the July 19th date for a few reasons. This time of year, you have a lot of school districts accessing the bond market, and so one of our goals is to get out in front of those districts. You all have a very good name, good credit rating, and so the thought is to access the market around that July 19th date. And that would allow us to close the bonds mid-August, and then certainly the district could include these bond payments when it's time to set the tax rate and finalize that once you get your certified values in July. So that's the proposed timing for the bond issue. And with the delegation, we're not obligated on a certain date to sell the bonds. It gives us some flexibility if there's some disruption in the market or so on. We'd work with the underwriting firms and develop a different timing. So as long as those parameters are met, we can move forward with the pricing. And I did fail to mention within the order, the delegated authorized representatives would be board president, superintendent, or CFO. Either one of the 3 would have the authority to finalize the bond sale if the parameters are being met. So. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the financial side. And then also, I know Mr. Sam Gill's here as well, if there's any specific question on the bond order itself.
Do I have any trustees with questions or comments? Dr. Reich?
So I appreciate the cap, I think you said 5.75?
Yes, sir, 5.7.
And where are we currently?
In the current model, we're estimated at 4.08%.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay. And that's with all the rising rates, the feds and everything that's going on. I'm just thinking, just a few years ago, we were at 2, maybe even a little less, but it's just what it is.
Yes, we were spoiled for a number of years.
Yeah, yeah. And I know it's a little bit unfair asking for a crystal ball, but I think there's talk on the street that there might be another couple of hikes in there. Do you have any information relative to what we're talking about tonight?
Yes, sir. I think in these numbers, we've priced in 2 hikes in the future, and that's mainly on the short end. These are 25-year bonds.
Yeah.
But that does impact the entire market. But I would agree, we're factoring in those rate hikes or that are currently priced in the market. One good thing on the structure, there is a large principal payment that we are planning to make in the very first year, so that will help amortize quite a bit of the $100 million in that very first year. So,
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you very much.
yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Mr. Wilbanks?
Thanks for the clarification on the interest rates. I did have another question, just for the clarification for those folks at home who are listening to this. We've had quite a few questions of why we're going out and doing refundings, but especially with interest rates higher. But you anticipate the mechanism to do those refundings would be defeasance on non-callable bonds?
Yes, sir.
Majority, and then explain to those who might be listening at home how defeasance works, where we replace the non-callable bond with a package of securities, typically an escrow, which is taking advantage of that extra high rate right now to give them, to actually create the savings that we would see in that refunding.
Yes, sir. No, that's a very good point. The identified candidate is the 2020 bonds, and that was done taxable at taxable interest rates. And historically, in most cases, the taxable interest rates are higher than tax-exempt interest rates. So the 2020 was taxable. There's a mechanism now. We're able to take the money from this bond sale, put it in an escrow account that will pay off those taxable bonds, but we're actually able to sell these bonds as tax-exempt. So we're able to take the benefit of going from taxable interest rates down to tax-exempt interest rates in this situation. But you're correct, we'd have to place the funds in that escrow account. That escrow account will make those bond payments when they come due. Now, if the tax-exempt interest rates were to rise between now and that July 19th pricing date, and we were not achieving savings, then we would just not move forward with that.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So
it's
it
mainly,
is-
yes, sir.
Definitely, if you do it, there's definitely going to be a net present value gain and financial benefit to us as a district, saving us a lot of, potentially, a good chunk of money.
Yes, sir. We would not move forward unless those savings are realized.
So, no, appreciate it. Anytime we can save districts money, we're being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars, especially on these bonds, and taking advantage of that difference in rates between the taxable and non-taxable rates. So,
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Any other comments or suggestions or concerns? No? Thank you so very much. You made this difficult thing easy to understand, and I appreciate it, but thank you for all that you do and everything that your company does. Thank you. The district appreciates you.
I appreciate that. And we'll give a full report. Once the bonds are priced, we'll package a full report and make sure that's provided to the board.
Wonderful. We'll look forward. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. McMurrow?
Thank you, President Fowler. I do have a motion, so I move to approve the order authorizing the issuance of the Arlington ISD Unlimited Tax School Building and Refunding Bonds Series 2023, approving a paying agent / registrar agreement, an official statement, and a bond purchase agreement, and approving all other matters pertaining thereto.
Thank you, Ms. McMorrow.
I second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. McMorrow and a second from Mr. Wilbanks. Please vote. Motion carries. Thank you. We now move to discussion item A. Dr. Wertz.
So as you know, we're finishing our fiscal year, and tonight Darla Moss will provide us with the final financial update for the 22-23 school year. Mrs. Moss.
Thank you, Dr. Wertz. So, for the last several months, we've been talking about the 2024 budget and getting ready to adopt that. It was adopted at our last board meeting. So now this is a time where, again, we talk about two different budgets. We're going to go back and talk about our 2023 budget. The fiscal year for 2023 ends on June 30th of this month. So I'm just going to give you a brief financial update on where we are as of right now. So in your board packets tonight, we have several items. Again, it's the end of the year, and there are some annual items that we have to bring to the board. I won't go over all of these. Some of them are standards. I will point out that we are doing a final budget amendment tonight for 2023. So our team, Ms. Martin and her team, has determined what we think our spending is going to be. We are bringing that for your approval tonight to say that's those are the amount of dollars that we will need for the 2023 fiscal year. Other routine items, the monthly financial report and monthly investment report are as of May 2023. Salvage is routine. We do have two annual reports, one for the fees related to co-op purchasing, and the other annual investment activity report that you receive each year in June. We have a resolution, again, designating investment officers. We have a new treasurer that's coming on as an investment officer. We're asking for the resolution uncommitting fiscal year 24 fund balance for the universal pre-K. We talked about that at the last meeting. We have our campus carryover and purchases greater than 50 and fiscal year 24 bids as well. We don't have a board meeting in July, so that helps us to continue to operate during July. And I just want to highlight some of the points on the final budget amendment. We have, for the general operating fund, we have some cross-functional changes. We also have increases in our revenue, investment income, property tax collections, and our state revenue as well. On the expenditure side, we decreased the budget with the ESSER supplanting of salaries from ESSER 3, and some of our forecasted expenditures, we were able to reduce those as well. And we also have the transfer to capital projects. We talked about the transfer for ERP and HRIS, that potential system that we're looking at, and also the Westler Park property land swap with the city where we have to pay for the park. We are going to do a transfer from general operating to capital projects for a net change of $35.6 million in general operating. On our debt service, we have a small change of $3.8 million that includes investment income and property tax collections. For child nutrition, a very small change there, $393,000 for an increase in investment income and meal revenue. On the capital projects side, we have some cross-functional changes and an increase in revenue on the investment income side, and the offsetting transfer from general operating for the ERP and Westler Park property. And then other resources decreased by the bond issuance budgeted in fiscal year 23 and is occurring in fiscal year 24. And that's the bond sale that Mr. Maha just talked about, where originally we budgeted for that to occur in February of this year, and now we're doing it in July, which is in the next fiscal year. This is a look at our general operating fund. Column 1 just shows you our original budget. The column in the middle shows you what we're forecasting to end 2023 at. Our revenue, we're estimating $583 million, and expenditures, $556. You can see some of the detail there. I will point out those vacancy savings of $37 million is what we're looking at right now. Recapture is still around that 1.8 that we've been reporting out all year, and for a net total expenditures of $556 million, leaving excess of $27.9 million for the 2023. Now we're going to have a lot of changes. We still have invoices coming in. We'll still be paying those invoices in July and some in August. We still have audit entries. Our external auditors are here, so we still have audit entries that may adjust that number. When we get to November at the end of the audit, that 27.9 will go down because of the transfers that we talked about earlier that are going into capital outlay and the other places. I also like to share out how the budget would look if we didn't have those ESSER funds. So if you see that column on the end, we would have an $11.8 million deficit without those ESSER funds. And the next slide just kind of details that out for you. ESSER 2 and 3 indirect costs of $4.6 million, ESSER 2 supplant of $14.8 million, ESSER 3 supplant of $20.3 million, for a total of $39.8 million that's impacting our 2023 fiscal year budget. And this is just a look at the other funds. Debt service, not very many changes. You can see the original budget. We budgeted a $5.1 million excess, and we're now forecasting that to be about 10.4. Our capital projects, we had a original budget of $390,000 deficit, and I kind of want to talk through that and why it looks the way it looks. If you look at our expenditures in the original budget, it was $534. That amount represents everything that we had left in bond sales that we had sold. And so we adjusted that amount at the June, when we presented out on June 8th to $199. We've adjusted that down some more. Ms. Martin got with Mr. Horn and his team to see what do you think we're actually going to spend by the end of this year or by June 30th, and that was adjusted down to $105 million. And then if you look at the other resources there in the right-hand column, that 97.7, that is our excess from the 2022 year that we had, that $53 million that we were going to put into capital projects to help with the 2019 bond funds. Our natural gas that we transferred is included in that. ESSER for the ERP, the Westler Park property, and then the property that we sold, if you'll recall, on Arbrook and Barton Road are all included in that other resources amount for our capital projects, leaving an excess of $12.5 million. So that's the change in those numbers. I just wanted to take a minute to explain why it looked so differently. For the Child Nutrition Fund, we're looking at a $393,000 excess. That's our estimate as of right now. And again, there will be invoices still paid and the audit entries as well. And this, you're familiar with this slide. This just shows you where we are as far as ESSER 1, ESSER 2. We only have a small amount remaining in ESSER 2. This is as of May 31st, so that amount should, ESSER 2 should be fully expended by the end of this fiscal year. ESSER 3, we have $61 million left there. And if you'll recall, for the 2024 budget, we earmarked about $30 million of that to offset the budget and help in the balancing of that budget. And then our 2014 bond, we're almost done with that. We believe that by the end of fiscal year 2023, after all the audit entries, the 2014 bond will be closed out. We have currently $3.8 million in projects in process. And then a look at our 2019 bond. I'll just show the projects in process are $94 million. And our amount remaining there is $330 million. And we have a lot of projects going on right now in the summer. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Wilbanks?
Thank you, President Fowler, and thank you, Ms. Moss. Just kind of tying out your slides here with our budget amendment. I know one's a forecast and one is the actual budget amendment. I don't know if you have the budget amendment green sheet in front of you?
I don't have it with me, but
Okay.
I'll try to answer your question.
So if you could go to the general operating fund. So we were gonna end your projected end of year is 27 million, and that's the projected, but what we have here doesn't include all the things that you're anticipating, because we only show a increase to fund balance before the other resources of 18.75, so another 9 million, just over 9 million.
Yes, and the difference in the final budget amendment is we have to allow for a little room in there. We are not exactly sure what all POs are out there that might come, so it's actually an audit point for us if we don't create that final budget amendment to where it will include all those expenses that may come forward. We could bust the function. For instance, let me give you an example of instruction. I don't know what the amount on instruction is there.
315,546.
315 million?
315 million.
Okay. So
546,000.
So if we were to spend 316 million on instruction, then we would do what we call bust the function on that. And that's because we've spent more money than the board approved us to spend. So that's why we put a little extra in there. That's why you're going to see the difference in what we're actually forecasting than
Okay.
what you see there.
Okay, totally get
Okay.
it. Totally get it. And so then the other uses for those who may be looking at home through our consent agenda, who probably aren't, but the 71.75 million in other uses in category 8,000. That is all of the excess fund balance plus consolidation of oil and gas that we were going to move over to capital resources, which appears in the income, the other resources on the capital projects, along with the money that we're moving over for the park project, park swap, right?
Yes, that is correct. That's part of that. I mentioned earlier the 53 million from 2022's fiscal year that we are using for that. And again, like you said, the natural gas and some of those ESSER plants as well, where we're moving over to from one fund to the other.
Yeah, so anyone watching at home, when they see the red ink on our budget, it is anticipated funds that we consolidated into our general fund that we're moving over to capital projects for pre-approved projects, because we've got a very healthy fund balance.
That is correct.
So, okay, just want to clarify all that. Everything else looks great. It looks like we're going to end up in a nice addition to our fund balance yet again. So thank you and your staff for all the hard work. Looks good.
Thank you. And that 27 million is our estimate, but it doesn't include all the transfers that we're moving. So that number will go down. Okay.
Anyone else with comments or questions? Ms. Moss, thank you so much to you and your team. I know you spend a lot of time crunching these numbers, and I also appreciate how conservative you are with the district, with the community's money. And I like that you estimate, but you always have that little bit of padding that makes us feel comfortable. So thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, President Fowler.
We will now address the consent agenda items, which consist of routine items grouped together for approval as one item. Unless removed from the consent agenda, these items will be acted on at one time with no discussion. Trustees, are there any requests for items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda for further discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion to accept the agenda?
Move for approval.
Thank you. We have a motion from Mr. Wilbanks and a second from Dr. Reich. Please vote. Motion carries. Thank you. We now move to discussion item B. Dr. Wertz?
Thank you, President Fowler. As everyone knows, we just finished the legislative session, and we have Dr. Hill and Mr. Anderson from our Hillco partners here tonight to give us an update on the legislative outcomes in relationship to the district's priority items.
So, good evening, President Fowler, board members, and Dr. Wertz. As you mentioned, we are here to just kind of give an update on the post-legislative agenda, post-legislative update. As you're all aware, the 88th legislative session closed about a little over a month ago, and we are now in our second special session. But what we've done, board members and staff included, we've been heavily involved in this entire process since the session opened, including trips to Austin, testimony, and letters and all the things like that. And so what we want to do today is invite Kate Kuhlman and David Anderson from our Hillco partners to just kind of give the board and the community just kind of an update of the post-session and possibly what's going on in the special session. So at this time, I'll turn it over to those two, and they will take us through a presentation. So. Thank you.
I had a good trip. President Fowler, trustees, Dr. Wertz, Dr. Hill, thank you very much. We would like to take a few minutes to look at what happened during the 140-day legislative session against the legislative agenda that the trustees developed last summer through the fall and then presented during this session. So thank you. We hope that if you have questions or want to dig into this, you'll let us know as we go. And Kate and I are going to do this together. I'm going to start, and then she'll be up to talk about some of these items, then I'll finish with a few of them. So you'll recall, you've seen this chart a number of times. We've talked about what we anticipate in this legislative session, and it does very much reflect what you anticipated. We know every legislative session starts with school finance. It ends with school finance. Whenever you do something for a system as large as ours, you're going to spend money. As we said before, you want to buy two number 2 pencils for the 5.5 million kids in the state. You're talking about a significant amount of money to start right there. We also knew that school safety would be significant, something that really first developed the public eye because of some of the things that happened in Santa Fe and other districts a number of years ago, but certainly the tragedy of Uvalde led us to believe that this legislative session, looking at a significant surplus, $33+ billion, that school safety would be something that would be important. And you recognize this, and you noted in your legislative agenda, the number one priority for the Arlington trustees and the school district was school safety, the number one priority. Talked also about learning lag. What happened with the pandemic, and I was up here on several occasions. Dr. Wertz, in your role as CIO, we remember you talking about how you were going to use the funds that came from the federal government to address this. We anticipated that the legislature would be doing more in the area of instructional support, knowing that, as you've heard from Ms. Moss, we're looking at an ESSER funding drop. So we anticipated there would be something there. The third area, parental rights. Anyone who's watching the public education debate over the last year would recognize that Governor Abbott's interest in parental rights meant that something would be done in this category this session. And then the final category, human capital, the one that really is the most expensive of all, thanks to the work of the 7 of you, Dr. Cavazos, Dr. Wertz, the entire team, Mr. Kale, the message was delivered here, and your colleagues around the state delivered a similar message, that we are facing a human capital crisis in Texas, the likes of which we have never seen before. We believe that message was delivered, and we really anticipated this would be a session, once again, with that surplus in which we would see support for school districts with regard to addressing the human capital shortages. That's where we were leading into the session. Your legislative issues, school safety, school finance, human capital, unfinished learning, a much more elegant way of talking about the learning lag than we did. And parental rights reflected these, and your legislative agenda was very well developed. What we'd like to do is just walk through very quickly those 5 agenda items, and the first one we'll start with is school safety.
President Fowler, board members, Dr. Wirtz, good evening. Beginning with your top priority on your legislative agenda, school safety. You see your legislative priority there. Really, so as we started, again, big issue going into the legislative session. There were 3 omnibus priority bills having to do with school safety, 2 in the House, HB 3 and HB 13, and 1 in the Senate, SB 11. They all took a slightly different approach, but there was some amount of overlap included in those. Where we ultimately landed was on HB 3, and again, you see a little bit of all of those bills included in this, but really kind of a lot of the HB 3 where it started was sustained. I'm not going to walk through every single one of these, but I will put them on the screen, and we've provided a lot of information to your staff and the Arlington ISD staff that's working hard on implementing all of this legislation. A lot of this I think you'll see continue to unfold as TEA and other entities that have some oversight on this do some rulemaking. So there's definitely, I think, some clarity that is needed and is likely to come, at least on some of the issues. Some of the big things that came out of this bill, one is the school safety allotment. Again, a lot of anticipation about going into session about school safety, and the safety allotment was one area where we did anticipate seeing some of the resources in the state focused. There was a very slight increase to the per student spending in the school safety allotment. I think prior to this, it was somewhere around $9.72 a student. It was increased to $10, but they also added a $15,000 per campus allotment for funding. Some of the other things, there's a $300 million overall. We'll go to funding in just a little bit, but there was about $300 million dedicated to this bill. Some of the other things that have really stood out in this bill, there is a mental health training program requirement. So district employees that do interact with students on a regular basis are required to do this. There's a requirement that all campuses have an armed security guard on campus. There's some exceptions, but they're allowing you as trustees to say we need a little bit of flexibility, but still the requirement is that you'll have some individual on campus armed as the safety, identified as someone for safety. We've heard a lot about facility standards in the interim following Uvalde and leading up to the legislative session. TEA, along with the School Safety Center, TEA has developed some facility standards. Those were finalized at the end of the legislative session in May, but this bill requires that TEA do it, not just for, as is now, new facilities, but also existing facilities. So moving on, and again, I've skipped over a few of these, but feel free to ask any questions if you have any about the specifics. But in SB 30, so you see there on the school funding side of things, there's $300 million for that bill. There's an additional $1.1 billion. HB 1 is your regular budget of the state ongoing expenditures. SB 30 is the supplemental budget. It has some one-time expenditures as well as catch-ups and other things that might be in that bill. But there's $1.1 billion in one-time funding for school safety initiative grants. So the agency will develop a grant program that will allow districts to seek funding to pay for specifically some of these facility upgrades that will be required under the facility standards. So that will be a part of this. I think, again, the way TEA sets that up, there may be other options for what that spending is, what that can be spent on, but it was really kind of purposeful for the facility standards. There's some other funding in the budget. We know your priority includes mental health, and I think everyone recognizes that when it comes to safety and security, mental health has to be a part of that discussion. There's a little bit of funding for TChat, which is the telehealth initiative on mental health. It's intended to allow any willing school district wanting to participate to be able to utilize that. And there's some funding for a capacity study for mental health professionals. A lot of discussion and work this session around mental health had a lot to do with workforce availability and how they could make sure that there's professionals available in the field. There's some other bills listed up there. We don't have to go through each one of them, but what you can really see is that the big piece of legislation was HB3, and then you have some additional bills pertaining to safety and mental health that passed on a smaller scale. Moving on to school finance, David's going to take this one.
To follow up on what Kate just talked about, when we look at school finance, we recognize that legislature can send money to schools really two different ways. We can do it through formulas, in which case you decide how the money is spent within some fairly broad parameters, or they can do it through grants. And the issue with grants is that you can get that money, but there's much more direction as to how you spend those funds. And I think that's a great example and a great segue from what Kate talked about to where we are with school finance, because what we see this time is some improvement in formula funding, but more significantly funding that comes through grants where the notion of local flexibility is not as great. We've talked many times over the years about the best instructional decisions are those made close to the learner. When it comes to facilities, we believe the best facilities decisions, the best safety decisions are those made close to the facility. It's also close to your community, because that's the connection that your parents and your taxpayers and the other citizens in Arlington have with the school. It's with that facility that's there in their neighborhood. Who knows best about what's needed in an older or newer or brand new facility than your staff and you as trustees? So school finance, remind you again, we were looking at a $33 billion surplus this session. This is the 30,000-foot view, and you can see what Kate just presented with the amounts for grants. The HB3 funding, we'll talk more specifically about 1605, but the $500 million. The golden pennies, and if you want an explanation on golden pennies, we're going to look over to Darla and say, come up and talk about golden pennies, because it's way over my head. And then some additional support for TRS active care. And again, I think Arlington, your staff, particularly Mr. Kale, and the work that the board has done, you get a lot of credit for the engagement of TRS on active care issues with school districts. So you can see what that total is. What you see on the other side, however, though, is the FSP reduction. And this reduction is really caused by the biennial surplus in the FSP, and you see that amount is $8 billion plus. All in all, 4.8 improvement, but 8.4 from basically the foundation school program. So the schools are paying for, the shorthand is the schools really are paying for these additions out of that FSP. This is a TEA slide. I do want to point out that you have these numbers. This is 3 categories. The first one is the new net funding for public ed, which is what we've talked about plus a little bit more. The second category, the new net funding for education appropriated and contingent. This is money that is in the budget but cannot get spent because enabling legislation has not passed yet. And we could see something happen in a special session, not the first, obviously, which has come and gone, not the second right now because the governor's call would not allow that, but perhaps a third or a fourth or a fifth session, special session farther down the road. And this is where you see the additional money, almost $4 billion for schools, teacher pay, special ed, other areas. This is what's out there is the incentive for schools. You'll notice on the bottom of those 3 lines, school choice, $500 million to fund an initial school choice program. So that's contingent. And then the third one, and this is what hasn't passed yet, new state share increases for public ed. This is basically the tax reduction. And again, nothing in the first special. Possibility of getting this done in the second special, but don't look for anything to happen until after July 4th, because the House and the Senate will not be in time to really do anything until after July 4th. First day of the 30-day session was Tuesday, so we're 3 days in. So when you look at this, when we say, what's the possible state perspective on this? 2 points. Investing in tax compression is investing in our schools, and this pushes state share back up to 50%. We mention this because there are some people who have served in the legislature, none from the delegation here, but particularly the appropriations chair and other education leaders who have been out talking about this great windfall that school districts have received because of what happened this session, and they have all the numbers to show for it. We would contend that the likely ISD view that the 7 trustees and Dr. Wirtz and his staff would take is something more like this. Tax compression doesn't change the size of the cup or the district budget, only the mix of what goes into that cup. And this is good for taxpayers. We like that. Obviously, Mr. Wilbach, your comments a little bit earlier on the budget about the responsible stewardship to Ms. Moss. This is good for the taxpayers, but it doesn't add any money to the classrooms. So this is the 2 different perspectives on what happened during this legislative session on school finance.
On human capital, David again set this up as an issue going into the legislative session that there was a lot of discussion around. There was the TEA committee that was put together to look at all of these issues. There were the feeling of a staffing issue at local districts was very well felt. It was recognized by legislators. There were several pieces of legislation that dealt with human capital. A couple in particular that were kind of the big pieces and the priority pieces. The Senate had SB 9, the House had HB 11. Both of those did a lot to implement a number of different things, residency programs, mentor programs, more funding for teachers, some things around educator preparation, changes to the teacher incentive allotment, and a number of other things, staffing, schedules. It addressed so many different things. These were big omnibus bills. Ultimately, neither of those bills passed. And while there was funding in the budget, I can't remember if we put that up earlier or not, but about $4 billion for teachers, that money was unspent. There was no money. There wasn't any enacting legislation, as David mentioned earlier. So what we ended up with are a number of bills dealing with human capital, and these are some of them that I'll put up here on the screen. But as you can see, while helpful in many ways individually, some much smaller scale bills that are not looking at the teacher pipeline on some big omnibus level, trying to impact every aspect of the educator pipeline and supporting educators in classrooms and in schools. So you see a number of things here. We don't have to go through all of them. One thing worth pointing out perhaps is that there was a sizable investment into retirees. There's a COLA given to specific retirees based on qualifications and a supplemental payment for others. And so while there wasn't an investment on the active teacher side, there was an investment at the TRS retiree level.
When you look at the human capital issue that Kate just talked about, it was tremendous opportunity. We ended up with a lot of bills that in a circumstance in which you were not facing a teacher shortage, you were not looking at the financial circumstances with regard to teacher compensation, competing for those teachers who are out there, those bills we would say, well, this is a nice addition to the circumstance. And gee, in addition to that, we got a program that allows teachers and retired teachers to have special license plates. All in all, when it comes to human capital, this issue was just not addressed this legislative session. And it's one of the things that I think we'll look back on and say the legislature missed a tremendous opportunity. Now, will they have more during a special session? Absolutely they could, but we'll see what comes out of that. Because the special session that deals with education is not anticipated until after you're into the 23-24 school year, there are some issues about any new money that may come and what's the most efficient way to deliver it. And that's really where Darla and Scott become very important for us in helping to determine what's the best way to do this. And so we'll look forward to working with the two of them, obviously with Dr. Wirtz and with your permission, to help us better understand what's the best way for this, for Arlington ISD to do this effectively and efficiently. Unfinished learning, the learning lag. This was a session, again, in which there were opportunities for financial support, human capital support, actual instructional support. We ended up with a major bill, House Bill 1605, which was authored by the two chairs of the House and the Senate Education Committees. This bill warrants a lot of conversation with instructional staff, leadership, trustees all across the state of Texas. It's a comprehensive bill, and we're going to tell you what it's all about in 25 seconds. So start the clock, Mr. Wilbanks. This bill has 55 sections. It addresses changes in, I think, 8 chapters of the Education Code and 1 chapter in the Government Code. It has to do with teaching duties and training requirements, parental rights, state and local curriculum requirements. It creates a new categorization of instructional materials. It addresses governance of the review and approval process at the state board and TEA level. It is the most significant change in state policy with open ed resources in the history of Texas. And it creates an administrative responsibility, Dr. Wirtz, for you with board direction to provide a report to TEA each year that will get your instructional people and your financial people involved. And of course, it does provide some guidance for the transition from the current to new procedures. TEA has a slide deck for this that's 39 slides long. And that's just the introduction. The state board last week heard from TEA. They'll be spending the entire 23-24 year looking at development of rules and procedures to implement this bill. It's a bill we're going to be living with for several years before it's fully implemented. That's the major bill this session. Yes. I'm sorry.
It was closer to a minute.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I'll make it up here.
All the time you can give it. It's pretty big.
It is. We'll make it up here. There are 2 other programs we want to mention to you. The first one is Senate Bill 2124, an advanced math program. This is something that you're going to be looking at, and we know that in Arlington you have an advanced math program in middle schools. This changes it because now it's not based on a student hitting a certain criteria to say this student really is ready to go. It's 40% of all your students are going to have to do this. So it has implications for your human resources with availability of math teachers as well as professional development for training and materials costs. The commissioner has rulemaking and we'll be watching this closely. We anticipate that in 23-24, the direction will be to Dr. Wirtz from TEA and to staff will be, we want a good faith effort from you on this. But by 24-25, we really need to see this in place. The other bill we want to mention is 1416, which is the cleanup bill for House Bill 4545, the bill that probably got more attention after last session than just about any other. And you'll see with the first few bullet points, some positive steps have been taken to clean that up, to make it less onerous for school districts, to give parents a little more authority with regard to this, the tutoring and the support that goes with this. So we do see some improvements there. However, there are additional ISD reporting and regulatory requirements created with the bill. There are several other bills that touch on this, but those are the 3 that we wanted to bring to your attention tonight.
On parental rights, again, a big issue leading up to the legislative session and throughout the legislative session. We knew that this would be an area that would also encompass the issue of vouchers And where we ended on that, in the parental rights space, is there was a big bill that dealt with, they had the parental bill of rights and vouchers and other things in it. That bill did not pass, and we had a few small bills, or small in comparison, I should say, but not small, meaningful still, to highlight. HB 473 deals with prior parental notification when conducting a threat assessment. There's a bill involving a parent's ability to have their student take a high school course over again. A few of the other bills, just to highlight, that aren't on this slide, HB 18 was a bill that passed and has a lot to do with it. It was really kind of talked about in relation to social media, and there's a parental consent piece of that bill. I think for districts, again, a lot to come on this, but I think there are a lot of districts that are looking in that going, okay, well, it's talked about in relation to social media, but there are a lot of other things, apps, other things that you all use on campuses and with schools that could have interaction too. So rulemaking on that one, I think a lot of people will be following and watching, and I know your teams will be looking at that closely. HB 900 is another one. That was the bill pertaining to library materials. That bill did pass. And really a lot of the rating piece of that, there's a requirement for a rating. That part is on the vendors that will supply library books to your schools, but their portion of the bill does not go into effect until January, I believe, and in September, districts will still have the requirement to get any books out of their libraries. And so I think how districts implement that bill in the interim will be something that y'all will probably be looking into some too. A few other bills that David already mentioned, HB 1605, which had parental rights things woven into it. A few others here, 1416, he also mentioned. So there were this legislation, while the big piece didn't pass, it was in a lot of legislation and still an issue that got a lot of traction this legislative session. As I mentioned, the voucher bills did not pass, and we'll talk one more bill and then a little bit about next steps and how all of this might play into any special sessions coming up.
What you've seen with the bills that Kate's just mentioned, they're single subject bills. They deal with education, but when it gets to the school district, you have several departments that are touched by this. And so it's something, Dr. Wirtz, that several of your people will be looking at components of each of these bills, how it affects teacher training, how it affects school safety, how it affects facilities, how it affects HR. Those are going to be things that will be worked out over at the district level. We do have one last bill, as Kate mentioned, and that's your specific legislative objective on local authority. And we were asked to work with the legislature to amend Education Code Chapter 11 to allow you to have the same authority to do an economic development policy with the Fine Arts Center that other districts around the state have, specifically one that originated in Victoria. I will tell you that this passed. Representative Chris Turner filed the bill, got it through the House. Senator Brian Birdwell picked it up. You talk about a great team effort. Democratic representative, Republican senator. When the House hearing took place, Dr. Hill was there to testify for it. When the Senate hearing took place, President Fowler was there to testify for it. This was a really positive effort, and we'll tell you that Kate and I were concerned throughout the session about getting this done. We could get it through the House, we could get it through the Senate, we still had to get it not vetoed by the governor, and it did become law without his signature, but without a veto. And I did want to specifically mention the important role that Chris Turner and his staff played, the important role Brian Birdwell played. President Fowler will tell you the night that she was there for that hearing, Senator Birdwell worked the State Affairs Committee in a very positive way to set up her testimony. And that testimony was very good. I'd also say to you that we had a lot of help from the Chamber of Commerce, and I think all of you know that the Chamber, this was something that is very important for them. It is an economic development bill, but certainly Michael Jacobson and Rebecca Montgomery, who works for him, were very, very helpful. And it was several of the points that they made about the importance of this for the Center for Greater Arlington that really resonated. And my hat's off to the 7 of you for recognizing that this is a community facility, and the more accessible we can make it for the community, the greater return the taxpayers have. So we were real pleased to work on this, and one that we're proud of, and we know this will pay dividends for the Arlington community for years to come. So next steps.
Next steps, we've mentioned, Dr. Hill started by mentioning that we are in the middle of our second special session now. We have had the first one, it has come and gone. We're in the second one, we just started earlier this week. Both of those have largely been focused on property taxes, but the governor has said that, and most are anticipating that we will have a special session later in the year on related to education. I think we can, as we mentioned, vouchers did not get addressed this legislative session. I think the governor still has interest in more conversations on that. So I think you can anticipate conversations there. Of course, that relates to school finance, and there are other issues that throughout the session came up, that including teacher pay, that did not get done and is a priority really of both chambers and the governors, I think, as well. And so likely to see some additional education issues in a special session after this is completed and later in the year. The House did establish some select committees on both of those issues, property taxes and education related. So those will happen later this month. Are we in July?
Not quite.
No, next month, middle of next month. So those will take place, and they are to supply a report to the House by August 11th to help steer where they will go with these issues. So
Okay,
more to come there.
They have hearings
July 11th and 12th. So those are scheduled and upcoming. I don't know if they're posted yet, but they're coming up. Rulemaking, of course, we've mentioned throughout this slide deck that there are several bills, particularly some of the big ones like 1605, HB3, where there will be a lot of rulemaking to help guide where things go. But some of these smaller bills too, you'll see rulemaking on those. So throughout the next year and a half in the interim, you'll get some guidance from the agency and others on exactly how they expect these bills to be implemented, both at the state level and local levels. And there will be interim charges, and of course interim charges are the speakers and lieutenant governors' priority issues that they believe need to be looked at and studied a little bit more closely during the interim and leading up to the next legislative session. With special sessions looming, that might get started a little bit later than normal and might be a bit more of a condensed timeline, but you will still see that process work its way through. And with that, any questions?
Do I have any trustees with questions? Mr. Chapa?
Thank you, President Fowler. I just had one question, or actually really two. The first question is the bill that dealt with the T-Chat program, and it said that it would be available for districts that are interested. What is T-Chat, and what does it mean for a district to be interested in it?
T-Chat is so there's a consortium of organizations, entities, nonprofits, the state focused on mental health for kids. And this is the telehealth option that the state is helping to fund. And so this was in HB1, it was the budget, and they put that funding that was listed up there to help make sure that any district that wants to can participate in that. I'm not sure whether Arlington is now, but.
So we currently are not, we have not used it in the past. We have a meeting actually with them the second week of July to talk about it. Yep. It allows you to be responsive to students' mental health needs. If there is a need that's exhibited that you want to address, you can work through telehealth medicine to get that student help. So our counseling department's working with them the second week of July.
Okay, and I know we have a care clinic but it's pretty heavily used. So is this potentially a way to expand the volume of students that we can serve?
So that's a good question. I think what we would have to do is understand in detail the services that will be rendered through the telemedicine platform. The Care Clinic focuses primarily on therapeutic services to students. When we meet with them, we're going to find out the extent of which that is to see if there's a way to expand that service to our students, whether it's therapeutic or other mental health remedies.
Okay. Thank you for that. The second question I have is I read briefly this morning that the Senate had passed or was considering a property tax bill with the additional sweetener of 2 years of bonuses for teachers. I think it was $2,000 for some teachers and $6,000 for other teachers. What do you think of the prospects of that, and whether or not we think it's sound policy to do a bonus versus ongoing pay or compensation assistance?
So know that you're talking to two people who do not have law degrees. So this is not intended to be any sort of legal advice on what is germane to the governor's call, but there is some question about how germane that is to the call, because it deals specifically with tax relief, property taxes very specifically. So if I were to handicap it right now, I would say that probably does not get through this special session, short of the governor expanding the call to include something there. Now, do I like the notion of additional funding for teachers? Absolutely. But again, to the point we made earlier, I think it becomes important for input from chief financial officers as well as chief human resource officers as to what's the best way, what's the efficient and effective way to get those funds to the school after, not only after a school year starts, but after the new state fiscal year starts. And this does require permission to go beyond the spending limits. So that's part of the consideration for the House and the Senate as well. We're still looking and trying to make sure we know what's heads and what's tails on that bill, but that's our first reaction.
Okay. It'll be interesting to see if it comes back, if it doesn't get through this time on germaneness grounds. But I know our policy, our practice as a board has tended to shy away from bonuses because while they're good for teachers, we all want teachers and educators to have more money. They tend to be a little gimmicky because they're not sustainable. And so I would personally, in line with our practice, I would much rather see the legislature commit to something on an ongoing basis rather than two one-off bonuses that may not be sustainable.
I think that if you were to poll retired teachers in the state of Texas, you would get a response that supports your contention, Mr. Chapa. If you ask the retirees, would you rather have a cost of living increase or would you rather have a one-time payment, which is really all they have had for the last 20 years, they would tell you we would like a COLA because that's lasting. And I think that lasting, more permanent approach is what the district has taken, and that's what we would certainly want to encourage our legislators to take with that.
Yeah, and on the point of retiree pay, I mean, it's an interesting point because my understanding, at least when we have contemplated bonuses, is that any bonus payments would not count towards teacher retirement. Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting whether if the bonuses materialize, if there'd be an exception for those.
That's one aspect that we need to investigate on this also, because certainly the teachers would say we would like whatever we get to count toward the formula, toward our annuity.
Yep. So. All right, thank you.
We're good now.
Thank you.
So, thank you both for the presentation. I guess to be continued because a lot of what we were anticipating is still maybe on the table, but we just have to hold our breath a little bit longer. Speaking of things that did pass the finish line, the SB 1416, which cleaned up 4545, I think you said it best, getting rid of the, eliminating the accelerated learning committees is going to be huge. and then reducing the number of hours. So a lot of relief there. Appreciate that. But then going back on to 1605, look, I'm all for providing high quality instructional materials to our teachers, but I'm also concerned about giving the teachers the ability to execute the art of teaching in a way that best suits their style and is most effective for them and their students. And I'm afraid that we're going down this path with 1605 where we're going to a cookie cutter approach and we're taking the creativity out of teaching. And when you take the creativity out of teaching, you take the effectiveness. I would argue you take the effectiveness of instruction out of the equation. And do you have any other thoughts on that? And is that indeed where we're heading with HB 1605? And the follow-on question I have to that is, along with 1605, this is the bill that also incentivizes districts to adopt that cookie cutter approach to curriculum with a $40 per student incentive?
1605 does contain language that says that the commissioner may not compel a school district to use the materials, that it's still a choice the districts would make. But clearly, there is the butcher's finger on the scale to some extent in this bill, because there's a $40 per pupil per year incentive, and it's money that would come from the FSP, but it would go into the district's instructional material and technology allotment for every student that is using high-quality instructional material as identified or as labeled that way by the TEA process and then approved by the State Board of Education. One positive aspect of this bill, and there are a lot of positive aspects of it, I have some concerns about the implementation, as you do, but one positive aspect is that it does place in a final position to decide whether a program is listed on an approved list in the hands of the State Board of Education, an elected body, with the exception of the OER materials. And our interpretation of the bill initially is that open ed resources that are reviewed and approved by the commissioner do not require state board approval to go on that list. But all the other materials do, whether they're materials that are reviewed because a publisher asked to have them reviewed, because the state board called for it, or because the commissioner determined that we really do need to look at phonics materials, for example. So there's still some wrinkles to that bill we have to get sorted out. What we do know, though, is that there are some incentives to move to OER, and there are some incentives to move to the state agency recommended high-quality instructional materials. I do like the checks and balance, but the incentive is likely not going to be available until the second year of this biennium at the earliest. And that raises some questions for Dr. Wirtz and his staff about what happens with what's in the pipeline right now, and that's K-12 science and many of the new career and technology courses specifically related to cybersecurity and what you do there. And our first take on this is there will be people who say, well, just hold off on that. Wait until we have the science rubric, and 2 years from now, then those science materials you use could qualify for the $40. Our take is a little more pragmatic. You really should finish this under the current rules because it's a moving target with the rules on the new high-quality instructional materials. And besides, by the time you get 2 years down the road, we could see K-12 math, we could see some additional English language arts and reading called for and reviewed. The bill requires that TEA staff up to the point that they can conduct 200 reviews every year. And TEA is authorized to have 75 new FTEs to implement this bill. It's 10% of the staff that was authorized at the agency about a decade ago. So there's a lot to this. I think that the districts will have to sort out what do we continue under the current rules, which you're limited to science and these CT courses. Everything after Proclamation 24 goes under the new rules, which are a work in progress. And again, we'll stay in close touch with district administration as we watch the rule development there. The rule, one last comment. In Texas, the Constitution governs our government, and the legislature passes laws that create statutes. It's the administrative code, though, that really affects you. And you know this from your experience on the board. For our 2 new members, you're going to find that out. The administrative code rules are developed in education primarily by the commissioner in the Texas Education Agency or by the State Board of Education. Higher ed goes to the coordinating board, others to other agencies. It's what happens in those rules that really help you determine what you're going to do with your local policy and your local practices. This is why it's important for us now to shift, well, not completely ignoring the legislature because we do have a special session, but it's important for us to shift over and watch the rulemaking. And trustees, you have been tremendous about being down there and having us register your positions, or President Fowler coming down to testify, or having Dr. Hill testify. It becomes just as important on some of these bills, and I would say 1605 is one of them, for us to monitor the public opportunities to have input into the rulemaking process, whether it's through written comments from the board or whether it's through any sort of public hearing. The public hearings are not as clear as with the legislature with regard to posting, but at least with administrative code rules, you have an opportunity to request a public hearing. If there's enough of a request, the agency has to have it. The state board does it routinely. And so I think that's going to be important for you to maintain your level of engagement at the rulemaking process, just as you have at the lawmaking process.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Switching gears and talking about school safety. I mean, I'm glad that that was a focus, much needed focus. And I was anticipating a lot of funds to help us because we have a lot of aging facilities. For a district that has schools that date back before the 50s, those are in a lot greater need than our brand new schools that are being built now that have layers of security built in. But then we get HB3 with all these additional requirements for security personnel, which we're desperate for. But I think there's a disconnect between the challenges everyone faces and our ability to meet the needs of this. I'm all for getting an armed security guard at every single campus, but we also have to be pragmatic. And how do we overcome that? And on top of that, talk about unfunded mandates. This is a big one.
Yes.
And I'm really worried about our budget and what that's going to do to not just our budget, but every district is now probably scrambling, figuring out, one, how can we hire the people we need to hire to keep our kids safe when there's not very, very limited resources out there, and then how are we going to pay for it? So hopefully I'm going to be sanguine that in the to be continued part of all these special sessions, that funding will eventually come down the pike for this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that certainly hear the way you're thinking about this, and really as you look at HB3 and everything that's included in that, as well as the facility standards that have been developed at TEA, that is a costly endeavor. And in addition to armed guards on every campus, there is the mental health training requirement in district. It's a layered bill, and it's a layered issue. I do think that there will be continued discussions about funding, and I think that the process on school safety, again, there's a lot to play out, and I, like you, hope that continued funding for school safety will be a part of any discussions going forward.
Yeah, thank you.
I would add, Mr. Wilbanks, I'd add to what Kate said. House Bill 4545 may be the blueprint for you, and you'll remember after the last session, House Bill 4545 got a lot of attention. And I told this to the staff earlier today. I think we may have mentioned it with the committee. in August and September and October of 2021, when we ran into state legislators and senators at various events, the question that always came up was, hey, I need to ask you a question. I've gotten back to the district and, man, I've gotten my ear chewed on. They might have mentioned some other part of the body as well. Gotten it chewed on by trustees and superintendents and others over House Bill 4545, that it's not workable, that all of these things that we know were a problem with it. And their question was always, is the bill as bad as they're saying it is? And our answer was pretty short. No, it's not as bad as they say it is. It's worse. School safety is that issue this session, because the policies, to the extent that a state-driven policy, a panic button, for instance, in every classroom, or state solutions that every district has to do this, regardless of the age of your facility, the policies are sound, and they really do have the well-being of kids in mind. But the state is asking you, they're asking Dr. Wirtz and his staff to do something with your direction that they have not provided the funding for. And I would say to you that you've got a delegation that pays attention to you. That's not true all across the state. And you've got a delegation that runs the gamut of political interest, from very conservative to very progressive. You've got Republicans and Democrats. Now is the time to be talking to them about that, so that they go back to Austin later in this second special session, or whenever it may be, and they say to the leadership in their chambers, we've got to do something about this. This is the time to become, this issue is one, I believe, the funding for school safety is where you become the squeaky wheel.
And that has to start now.
I think it has to start now.
Yeah, no, I agree.
If
All right.
it didn't start 2 weeks ago, it has to start now.
All right, David, as a Longhorn,
Yes.
I need you to help me out as a
Yes.
fellow Longhorn.
Yes.
And talk to me like I'm an Aggie.
Yes.
And try to really explain. I'm kind of missing it. On your slide on school finance, where you have the table, and you
Yes.
talk about all the amounts of additions.
Yes.
And then on the reduction side, I'm missing what you're getting at when you say the reduction in the foundational school program created by the biennium.
Foundation school program surplus.
Surplus. So we had, are you trying to say that we had a surplus this year, but we're not gonna have a surplus next year, so it goes away?
Saying we had a surplus, and that surplus has to do with the amount of, I'm trying to think of the correct term, it's excess revenue. The amount of excess revenue that was projected for this year, for this biennium, this one that we're finishing, the amount that was projected was below what was actually collected by local school districts.
Okay.
This is Chapter 41, the old
Gotcha.
Chapter 41
Got it.
districts. And so that amount of money basically has given the state, if you look at this, it's given the state almost $4 billion that has come from school districts in excess revenue from property taxes.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been returned, that basically offsets general revenue that would go to education otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Okay.
So, I need to channel my inner Aggie more often.
I'm looking over your shoulder at Miss Moss and her staff over here to see if they're nodding.
They know I'm only
No,
kidding.
they're shaking their head at me saying, no, you're not explaining this very well. But that's the group over here who have that level of expertise. And
I'm worried I might have an Aggie right behind me.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to make any comment there, so.
So,
I appreciate the Longhorn reference.
welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Ms. McMurrow?
Thank y'all. This is such good information, and we do appreciate you guys being here and partnering with us, not just tonight, but the whole entire ride through the 88th session. Can we go back to the slide where you had a breakdown of the new total funding from this session in millions?
Is it TEA slide or is it?
Yes, the TEA slide, and I think for you guys, it was slide number 9, if that helps any. Sorry. A lot of clicking, sorry about that.
That's okay. There's probably a quicker way to do this, but,
Probably.
there.
There it is, okay. So if we look underneath the appropriated and contingent,
Yes.
that means this is what was set aside for these items, is that right?
This amount of money is in House Bill 1, which has been signed by the governor and has become law. However, those funds cannot be spent because the legislation that it is contingent upon passing to spend those funds did not pass.
Right.
So those funds are sitting there in the budget and cannot be spent. However, in a special session, legislation could be passed that authorizes the expenditure of those funds.
And so that's what I was getting at, with the anticipation of a special session being called to address vouchers or educational savings accounts. If you set aside $500 million, how long did they anticipate that covering? Is that
Well,
over a span of 2 years? Is that for the first year?
The assumption on this is that it would take a year to get things set up, because for a school choice program as anticipated by several of the bills, there have to be steps taken before students would be able to access that. So one would assume then that there's some overhead costs included in this, but the great majority of that $500 million would be to provide the education savings account for a number of students. There's nothing in this budget that would say we're going to fund for all the ones that want to be there. So if the full amount here was used, the full $500 million, and you had 50,000 kids that were eligible and there were no overhead costs, you can figure out how much would go, or I'm really looking at it the wrong way. If the amount is going to be $8,500, then divide that amount by 8,500 and it tells you how many kids would be eligible.
Okay.
Again, the problem with the school choice, though, is that once it starts, it's in statute, and now what's the obligation of the state to fund to meet the need? And in every state that has passed a school choice program, the costs have skyrocketed over the first 4 to 5 to 6 years and continue on. Part of that has to do with the anticipation of the kids that use it. Very few kids will be using it in the first year in the upper grades. Very few kids graduate out, but the number of kids who would be eligible coming in at kinder and first over the next couple of years is tremendously higher. So the cost, it's not an algebraic increase, it's
Right.
more of a geometric increase.
And the way I understand it is most of our school districts here in Texas are rural enough to where they don't have a facility that would even be able to, a parent would not really be able to have a place to use this voucher. Is that correct?
Well,
Public
it
schools kind of
is.
their-
It is, but for rural schools, it's a different challenge. Here in Arlington, people would have the option of a private school or, depending on the structure of the bill, a homeschool situation. For rural schools, the challenge will be the homeschool pods that will develop. And a number of the national organizations who support a voucher program have the capacity to help parents set up homeschool pods, provide materials for them. There are other wrinkles there that affect rural schools. It's my opinion that every school district in Texas will be damaged financially with a voucher program. No one, from the smallest common school districts, the 4 common school districts that remain that enroll less than 20 kids each, well, 3 of them less than 20 kids, all the way up to Houston ISD with almost 200,000 kids. Every district would feel negative financial repercussions from a school choice program.
And thank you for advocating for that, on our and many other school districts' behalf. I think that people run away with the narrative of parental choice, but as we know, under Texas Education Code, Chapter 26, our parents have rights, and over 90% of our students here in Texas attend Texas public schools. And even here in Arlington ISD, and I know so many other districts, we, within a district, offer choice. We offer a variety of learning pathways for our students, starting when they come to us as pre-Kers and kindergartners. As a public school district, we comply with TEA's standards and rating system. We accommodate our students receiving special education services as required by law for public school districts to do. We hire highly qualified teachers that are certified through the state, and only highly qualified teachers. And our board has taken a very public stance on, just as you said, we are not in agreement for vouchers. And we agree that parents need that choice and students need to learn how they learn best. But I think that the narrative has just really been clouded, as time goes on. And, our board president waited over 10 hours in Austin to testify on our behalf on that issue. And as a board, I just encourage all my colleagues, we need to continue advocating to keep public funds in public education, because I feel as though our parents and our community is looking to us. And if anyone watching needs to see more evidence that an education savings account has the potential to divert those public funds away from public schools, you can just take a look at this slide and understand that this $500 million would just be the beginning. Thank you.
I think it's safe to say that the great majority of the public, when they look at any school district, whether it's Arlington, which is truly a district of choice, or a smaller district, they generally have a real good idea of where the strengths and where the shortcomings may be. Can look and see this. They have a very good idea of what they get, because you're so public with what you do. You're very transparent with what goes on. And people know what Arlington ISD is about. They know what goes on in the campuses. That's not the case with private schools. You do not see the shortcomings in private schools until you enroll your students in those schools. That's awful late to find out that they don't take care of special needs, or they're not doing X, or they're not doing Y, because you've already committed to that. And that's, I think, one of the beauties of our public school system. You just enumerated a number of them. You are very transparent. And this board's a great example of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McMurrow. Ms. Richardson?
Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Coleman, thank you guys for being here. Kate, my question is for you. You talked about in one of the bills, libraries, and that is a big deal, especially here in Arlington, Texas. Could you just give us a little bit of a recap of what that looks like now that it's gone through the legislative session?
Sure. So HB 900 passed. There was a Senate bill as well as a House bill, and they had slightly different approaches. Ultimately, what passed was HB 900. There were a number of discussions on how exactly that bill would look, and there were discussions throughout the process, but where it landed is, again, vendors who supply library books to libraries and library content to schools would have to develop rating systems based on some standards, presumably that will be put out by TEA, I believe. But they will have the ratings, and they will rate their own books based on that. I think it's somewhat defined in the bill as well, so I'm not sure how much TA will have to do there. But they will develop their own rating systems individually as vendors and rate their books. And that is, again, I believe, to be put into effect by January 1, 2024.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in the meantime, districts are required to ensure that there are no explicit materials in libraries by September 1.
That's the rub for the districts. The vendors have been given this charge. They have basically 6 months to do this, which is, there's a lot of pressure on them to get this done. But in the meantime, you have responsibilities to address this issue as Kate just described. So there's a gap there in which you're actually having to take some steps without having the information that the library vendors are to provide, and really without having a lot of direction from the state. And Kate, it's either TEA or the state board, will provide some guidance or some framework. But it's really going to be on someone else to provide the ratings. The other issue here is that if every vendor does their own rating, we could end up with something that mirrors the motion pictures. You can end up with some other categorization. Heck, someone might even come up with a brilliant idea of doing an A through F. I don't know who would want to do that with ratings, but that could come up.
So one more question. We've talked about that part of our job is being advocates, and we've heard how Dr. Hill went down and how also President Fowler went. And this is incredibly important that we continue to do this. Is there anything we can do as a board to support you during special session or in the early fall months? Is there anything you could ask of us?
I would ask that you continue to develop and enrich the relationships you have, particularly with Representative Cook, Representative Turner, Representative Tinderholt, and with Senators Birdwell, King, and Hancock. And that would include the conversations that you have. Some of you have personal and professional relationships with them, professional with regard to their positions in the legislature. Continue to have the conversations with them individually. Collectively, I would encourage you to look at opportunities to get them into the district. I think today we had one great example of what you can do with two of the staff members for the members that really worked hard and passed the bill regarding the Fine Arts Center. But it's things that could be as easy as inviting them over the course of the year to be at the football game. Kate was involved in getting a bill passed that recognizes November 3rd as Texas High School Coaches Day. That's a Friday night. What happens on Friday nights in November? You're going to have a number of home football games. Invite the members to come out and do the coin flip when you're recognizing the coaches in the district on Coaches Day. Do the same at the Fine Arts Center or with other academic activities. Have them come in and see this. You've heard me say before at the last board meeting, I left and said, you want a great example of why our accountability system is coming up short. You should have been at the Arlington ISD board meeting with that night when you recognized your student advisory committee, and I know there's a name, an acronym.
SLAB.
I thought it was SLAB, but you recognized them, and they were here and made a great impression. You had administrative appointments, and there were people here from those campuses and those communities that were here that night to applaud those appointments. Those things don't show up in the accountability system. That's what our representatives need to see. And so to the extent that you can engage them in the life of the district and what you're doing, that's what I would encourage you to do, because those relationships, they have to be done year round. And this is where, again, my hat's off to several of you. I think about Dr. Reich and some of the relationships he's built over the years. That doesn't happen just by going to Austin during a legislative session and visiting them in their offices. We can do that, but those visits are more effective because you're talking to them here in the district and you get them onto your campuses. Oh my God, your campuses and your faculty are stunning. And what you're doing here with some of the programs, it's the envy, not just of other districts in the state, but across the region. Get them in here to see that when they're not in session and engage their staff. This is something that Dr. Hill has talked with Kate and me a lot about. 8,400 bills this session. No member can tell you what's in those bills, but they have someone on their staff who's familiar with all of those different policy areas. And we need to recognize their important role. The two district directors that were there today left so impressed with the Cavazos Center, and they're going to get their members back. One of them would have been here had the Austin airport been functioning correctly today. But those are the sort of things that I think
thank you to both of you, and thank you for being feet on the ground, but also putting it into layman's terms that we could understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Dr. Reich?
Thank you, President Fowler. David, Kate, thank you as always. I always appreciate both your high level and your granular view and knowledge of the entirety of this session as related to education. It's very, very important, very impactful to me personally, to us as a board. So thank you always for being able to provide that clarity. Again, 30,000 foot as well as into the weeds where the devil's in the details. To dovetail off of getting people up as far as our delegation, I think we actually had Tinderholt do one of those at our football game way back when. And I don't know that it's related, but there definitely was a shift in his acceptance of let's really dialogue two ways. So there is a lot of opportunity there that lays ahead. I wanted to ask regarding HB3, Mr. Wilbanks was talking about, and of course, all the realities of the labor issues, the funding, the fact that there's a lot still to be kind of worked out. So one of my questions regarding that is, how does that look? So that will be, as far as like for the armed security, whatever that is, we have a rulemaking process. We have implementation, probably September 1 is when it becomes effective. So that rulemaking process is not going to be concluded. It's not even going to be begun by September 1. So help us understand how that works. And then also with regards to that, as well as other bills where, as you've said, SBOE always has public hearings, pretty stable. TEA, we need to activate that. How you can help us advocate for that, be aware of that, and what you can do specifically to make us aware of, hey, this is an opportunity. We need to be a bug in TEA's ears.
Well, Kate and I were at the State Board of Education meeting last week, and TEA did provide legislative review for the board. And in doing that, they laid out general timeline for how they'll implement. And several of the bills are going to be addressed earlier. Some will take a little bit longer. We mentioned 1605. That's going to be something that will take a year. And TEA anticipates more technical assistance coming to schools on that a little later because some of these others are more immediate. So I think very specifically, we've got to continue to talk with TEA and make sure that we understand what their plans are for this. And that's at a high level with the big plan, but it's also drilling down to who's the responsible party at the agency for this. One of the things at the agency that is a real plus is their rulemaking operation. One of the very few real veterans who's been at the agency for a while is the woman that runs that. And every box is checked when they do that. They adhere to the Texas Register requirements very closely on the rules. So we'll be talking with Christine De La Fuente to get a schedule, and with the specific people at the agency that are going to be responsible for developing it, to see when do they want input, and is there an opportunity to provide some input informally before they craft their rules, or do we have to wait until we actually see a proposed draft before we can weigh in on it?
Okay. And would that opportunity potentially involve us as a governing body versus administration? Because my experience has been with Dr. Cavazos, it's maybe beforehand, it's usually after the fact, and it's TEA going to the admin saying here's the rules.
Yep.
So do you think there's opportunity for something different?
Oh, I think there is. Remember, the TEA letters are crafted to the administrator addressed when they talk about this, but the Texas Register posting is something that is available for everybody.
Okay.
I will say that our service centers will help a lot with this, and they'll help the superintendent and his staff. TASB becomes a real important player in this in terms of watching and making sure that the TASB government relations team is watching this and reminding trustees, here's what's coming up. So you should get it three different ways. You should be getting it from us.
Okay.
as well as from your professional organization, and really for Dr. Wirtz and his team, their professional association, which would be TASA, Texas School Alliance, and then again from the service centers.
Okay. Two more questions. One is on HB3. One of the bullets was, put my eyes on here, requires bonds be spent to achieve safety and security requirements compliance before funds are used for any other authorized purchase. So are those future bonds, current bonds that we've already passed? I'm assuming it's future, but I want to clarify.
The language does not specify.
Okay.
So to be determined, I would say. I mean,
Okay.
as it reads, it appears to be everything. That will be an interesting one to follow because, you know, the ability to spend funding on something other than what it's been authorized for is still in question. So I think that one will require some ongoing discussions. And again, it is pretty broad, but I don't know exactly what the intent of that is in terms of previous or future
Okay.
bond authority.
Okay. And final question regarding, maybe this is a bit of a crystal ball question for the special session that we know is coming. My impression is, in looking at the slide that is still up on our screens here for the TEA slide, that it's going to be but the bill that is going to be suggested is probably a carrot and a stick. Yes, here's the funding if these ESAs go through. What do you say from your experience?
Yeah, I think as you watched this legislative session, there were several issues that were discussed in tandem. The ones you mentioned here, school choice provisions, as well as funding, all funding, so teacher pay, but additional funding for schools is in that too. And really accountability was a third piece that, again, all of these issues were kind of working in tandem and part of discussion. So I think it's very fair to think that those issues would be discussed again together in a special session.
Yeah. Lots to look forward to. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Rausch. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the funding, 6,000 something per student to public school, but if a student leaves public school and goes to a private, the state will pay 8,000 and something for that child? Is that correct?
I believe the voucher that was at least discussed, again, nothing passed, but that was discussed was somewhere around
I think you're
8,000.
Very close.
And then you're comparing it, of course, to the basic allotment,
Right.
which is what funds schools.
And to me, that sends a message that students who leave a district are worth more than students who stay. If you stay, we'll give 6,000. If you leave, we'll give 8,000. I think that sends a very sharp message, if I'm interpreting that right.
You are. The circumstances are very fascinating to me. If the people who support a voucher program truly are about educational opportunity, not privatization, then they would be saying, let's link the basic allotment to the amount of money that goes to the voucher. And every time the basic allotment is raised, the voucher is raised. Basically join the interests together. That's not where they are. They don't want them linked. They want to be able to force more money into support on a voucher basis than in the basic allotment. And I think one of the things that would say that they really are serious about improving public ed would be as if those were linked, because then going forward, it's in the interest of the voucher-supported programs to have a basic allotment increase, just as it's in the interest of you and the district to see a basic allotment increase. But that's not the case. That tells me it's truly not about education opportunity, it's about privatization.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. It's like they can house it however they want, but the bottom line is that's exactly what it is. Well, thank you both so much for coming up and with all this information, but thank you especially for what you all do every single day, walking those halls, knocking on those doors, making those calls. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We now come to our open forum for non-agenda items. Ms. Forsberg, do we have any requesters registered to address the board regarding non-agenda items?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Forsberg. It is now time for our superintendent's report.
Great. Well, I'd like to share some information about some exciting news that's happened since the last superintendent's report at our last meeting. And I want to first thank our Technology Integration and Innovation Department for hosting another successful 3-week Camp Innovation. It was hosted at the Dan Diaper Career Center. And we had more than 600 students from across the district show up this year to learn about coding, fly drones, compete in competitions, and do just about everything else that they could set themselves up for success in the future. It was actually really fun to go see their engagement. You couldn't walk around the CTC without having to dodge a drone on a program, Sphero. Camps like this speak really to how dedicated our staff is and how smart our students are. I also want to congratulate the students at Nichols Junior High who were outstanding representatives of our district at the Business Professionals of America Leadership Conference. Nichols sent 9 students to the conference in California where they competed in the Workplace Skill Assessment Program. And not only did they compete, but they also excelled. Our one Nichols team actually won the top award in visual design, and 4 other Nichols teams were finished in the top 10 in their category. So we want to congratulate the students at Nichols Junior High, as well as the BPA advisor, Sabrina Taylor. And if you need more proof that our students are prepared for life once they leave Arlington ISD, then all you have to do is look at our instrument repair program at the Dr. Marcelo Cavazos Center for Visual and Performing Arts. These 3 students who just graduated are actually spending their summer working at music and arts, putting their skills they learned in the program to use. And we want to send our congrats to graduates Isaac Pena, Ryan Guerra, and Trang Nguyen. We also want to recognize their teacher, Joseph Stroll, for his work in providing opportunities for each of these students to pursue their passion in a very highly specialized field. We were actually out today looking at that program. Yeah. And then I also was fortunate this morning to be able to pop by Peach Elementary School for our district's annual extended school year learning 4th of July parade. You can see on the video, everyone was having lots of fun. It was wonderful to be able to see so many smiling students. As you can see, they're all decked out in red, white, and blue, parading through the halls and being cheered on by their classmates while the music's playing in the background. And I want to thank the staff for inviting me over and for the special education department and their work on the parade. It was really great to see all of our students and get to see the staff. And there's no better way to get ready for the future 4th of July holiday than with visits like that. So that concludes my superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Wertz. Do I have any school board reports? Okay. How about Ms. Secretary? Do we have anything to report?
At this time, we do not.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary. All right. Looks like we are ready to adjourn.